In the fading light of a Montana sunset, Jake Morgan stands in his weathered barn, gently stroking his last remaining horse, the final valuable asset of his struggling family farm. When a rain-drenched stranger appears at his door seeking shelter and a horse to borrow, his instinct to help overshadows his desperation. What he doesn't realize is that the mysterious woman, Elizabeth Chen, isn't just another weary traveler. She's a tech billionaire who walked away from her $40 billion empire searching for authenticity in a world of pretense. As she experiences his selfless kindness and witnesses the quiet dignity of his hardworking life, she sees a chance at something her fortune could never buy. But when the truth of her identity emerges, their pure connection faces its greatest test. Can real love survive when it's built on an unspoken truth? And will Jake's pride allow him to accept that the woman he's falling for could also be his? Farm's salvation? This heartwarming story explores how true wealth isn't measured in acres or assets, but in the courage to be vulnerable and the strength to trust in love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Morgan family farm as Jake made his usual rounds, his boots leaving deep impressions in the rain-softened earth. Thunder, his cherished black mare, nickered softly as he approached her stall, her warm breath visible in the crisp Montana air. He pressed his forehead against hers, inhaling the familiar scent of hay and horse that had been part of his life since childhood. "Just you and me now, girl," he whispered, reaching for the curry comb. The rhythmic strokes against Thunder's coat helped calm his troubled mind, but couldn't fully distract him from the stack of unpaid bills waiting in the farmhouse kitchen. The thought of selling her made his chest tight, but the bank's deadline loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. The farm had been in the Morgan family for 4 generations. Jake could trace his fingers along the barn's wooden beams and find the notches his great-grandfather had carved, marking the height of each child who'd grown up here. His own mark was there too, along with his sister Sarah's, their father's precise measurements etched into the seasoned wood. Now at 32, Jake stood alone in the legacy of his ancestors, determined not to be the one who lost it all. The local community had watched the Morgan farm's slow decline since the drought 3 years ago. Old Tom Peterson from the neighboring farm still brought casseroles, claiming his wife made too much, but Jake knew it was their way of helping without wounding his pride. The James family from the feed store had extended his credit twice now, their kindness a double-edged sword that both helped and humbled him. As Jake moved through his morning chores, each familiar task reminded him of what he stood to lose. The ancient tractor his father had taught him to drive sat idle, needing repairs he couldn't afford. The north field lay fallow, the irrigation system having given up the ghost last season. Even the farmhouse itself, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, seemed to echo his grandfather's words. Land's got no loyalty to those who can't tend it proper. He paused at the fence line, looking out over the rolling hills that had been his whole world. The morning fog was lifting, revealing patches of green where winter wheat struggled to take hold. A few years ago, this view had filled him with pride and purpose. Now it felt like watching an old friend slowly slip away. The sound of hooves on gravel drew his attention. Sarah's beaten-up pickup truck appeared around the bend, kicking up dust as she pulled into the yard. His younger sister had inherited their mother's practical nature, along with her dark, curly hair, and her weekly visits usually meant she had something on her mind. "Brought you some coffee," she called out, climbing down from the truck with 2 steaming travel mugs. The good stuff from Martha's Diner, not that instant garbage you drink. Jake accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, recognizing his sister's peace offering for what it was. They settled on the fence, a familiar routine from childhood, now weighted with adult concerns. "You're going to have to consider Mr. Chen's offer," Sarah said finally, her voice gentle but firm. The development company, no. Jake's response was automatic, final. I'm not selling to developers who'll turn this into another soulless subdivision. Sarah sighed, the sound heavy with frustration and worry. Jake, being stubborn won't save the farm. Dad wouldn't want you to go down with the ship out of pride. The mention of their father stung. Robert Morgan had died believing the farm would sustain his children as it had sustained him. Jake sometimes wondered if knowing the truth would have made his father's last days harder or easier. Thunder's excited whinny interrupted their conversation. The mayor had spotted the mysterious woman from last night, emerging from the guest cabin, her city clothes exchanged for the work jeans and flannel shirt Jake had lent her. Something about her struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place it. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, with a confidence that seemed at odds with her current circumstances. "Who's that?" Sarah asked, her eyebrows rising with curiosity. "Just a traveler who needed a place to stay," Jake replied, though something in his tone made Sarah look at him sharply. "She's borrowed Thunder for a few days." "You what?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "Jake, Thunder's the only thing of real value you have left, and you're lending her to a complete stranger." Jake watched as the woman approached Thunder's paddock, moving with unexpected grace for someone who claimed to be new to farms. The mayor, usually cautious with strangers, stepped forward to greet her like an old friend. "Sometimes," Jake said quietly, "you just have to trust your gut." He couldn't explain it even to himself, but something about helping this mysterious woman felt right, felt important in a way he couldn't articulate. Maybe it was the hint of sadness he'd seen behind her smile, or the way she'd looked at the farm with genuine wonder rather than pity. Whatever it was, for the first time in months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, the winds of change might blow in his favor. 3 days earlier, Elizabeth Chen had stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her San Francisco penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like stars fallen to earth. Her tablet displayed the headlines that had been haunting her for weeks. Tech titan Elizabeth Chen expected to announce merger, Silicon Valley's queen poised for biggest deal yet. Chen's legacy, innovation or sellout. The weight of her custom-tailored blazer felt suffocating. She slipped it off, letting it fall onto her pristine white couch, a piece of furniture she'd never actually chosen, but had come with the carefully curated life built around her. $40 billion. That's what they said she was worth. Funny how not a single cent of it could buy what she really wanted. One person who saw her as more than a business opportunity. Her phone buzzed again. Probably Marcus, her CFO, with another urgent update about the merger. Or maybe it was her, mother, calling to remind her about the charity gala where she was expected to announce her engagement to James Harrison, the venture capitalist her family had practically hand-picked. The same James who'd spent their entire last date talking about market projections and acquisition strategies. Elizabeth walked to her home office, where a wall of magazines displayed her various covers: Forbes, Time, Fortune, Wired. Each showed the same carefully composed image: Elizabeth Chen, the wunderkind who'd built Chen Tech from a garage startup into a global empire. Her hair was always perfectly styled, her smile measured, her pose confident but approachable. None of them captured. How empty she felt inside. She opened her laptop, bypassing the hundreds of unread emails to access her private server. Within minutes, she'd transferred a modest sum to an account under her mother's maiden name and booked a flight to Montana under the same alias. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before composing a simple message to her board of directors. Taking 2 weeks of personal leave, all merger discussions temporarily suspended. No further comments at this time. The response was immediate. Her phone erupted with calls and messages. The carefully constructed walls of her life began closing in, and for the first time in years, Elizabeth felt something real. Panic, yes, but also exhilaration. She changed into the plainest clothes she owned, a pair of jeans she'd bought years ago and never worn, a simple sweater that had somehow survived her assistant's regular wardrobe purges. In her safe, behind the certificates and contracts that represented her empire, she found the one thing she'd kept from before, an old photo of her father in their first tiny office, his smile genuine and proud, his arms around a teenage Elizabeth, as they celebrated their first successful app launch. "I'm sorry, Baba," she whispered, touching his face in the photograph. "I know this isn't what you imagined for me." Her father had died 5 years ago, leaving her not just a company, but expectations that had grown heavier with each passing year. He'd wanted her to be successful, yes, but had he wanted this? A life measured in stock prices and market shares? The drive to the airport was a blur. She'd left her regular phone behind, carrying only a basic model bought with cash. Her assistant would be discovering her absence right about now, probably already calling security. By tomorrow, the news would break. Elizabeth Chen, Silicon Valley's most eligible CEO, had vanished. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years building technology to connect people, yet she'd never felt more isolated. Her dating app had helped millions find love, but her own relationships never progressed. Beyond careful political maneuvering, her social media platform celebrated authentic moments, while she couldn't remember the last time she'd had one herself. On the plane, Elizabeth watched the California coast disappear beneath the clouds. A young couple across the aisle caught her attention, the way they leaned into each other, sharing private jokes and gentle touches. When was the last time someone had touched her without an agenda? Even her monthly massages felt like networking opportunities, the therapists always hoping to pitch their startup ideas. She'd chosen Montana almost at random, pointing at a map like a child playing pin the tail on the donkey. All she knew was that she needed somewhere real, somewhere far from the artificial world she'd been drowning in. The rental car she'd booked was basic, American-made, as far from her usual luxury vehicles as possible. The storm had been unexpected, forcing her off the main road onto smaller county lanes. When thunder had spooked at the lightning, sending Elizabeth tumbling into the mud, she'd thought her adventure was over before it began. But then she'd seen the lights of the Morgan farm, and something about the weathered barn and the kind eyes of the farmer who answered her knock had felt more genuine than anything in her carefully curated world. Now, standing in borrowed clothes that smelled of lavender detergent, Elizabeth watched Jake Morgan work with his horse. There was no pretense in his movements, no careful calculation in his actions. When he smiled at thunder, it reached his eyes, something Elizabeth had trained herself not to do in photos because it made her look too soft for business magazines. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She could buy this entire farm with what she spent on corporate retreats each year. She could hire a team of experts to restore it to its former glory, invest in the latest agricultural technology, make it a showpiece of modern farming. But watching Jake's quiet determination, she understood that doing so would destroy exactly what made this place special. For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt the knot in her chest begin to loosen. Here, covered in morning dew and real dirt, she wasn't Elizabeth Chen, tech billionaire and business icon. She was just Elizabeth, a woman who didn't know how to brush a horse, but was eager to learn. The thought brought a genuine smile to her face, one that would never make a magazine cover, and was all the more precious for it. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink when Elizabeth stepped out of the guest cabin, fighting back a yawn. She'd never been an early riser. Board meetings rarely started before 9, but the sounds of the farm stirring to life had roused her from sleep. The borrowed jeans felt stiff, the flannel shirt rough against her skin, yet somehow more real than any designer outfit she'd ever worn. Jake was already in the barn, his voice carrying softly through the morning air as he spoke to thunder. Elizabeth paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. Shafts of early sunlight filtered through gaps in the old wood, creating a tableau that no Instagram filter could replicate. "Morning," Jake called out, looking up from where he was mucking out Thunder's stall. Ever cleaned a horse stall before? Elizabeth shook her head, forcing herself to be honest, despite her instinct to appear competent. I've never done any farm work. To her surprise, Jake's face showed no judgment, just a hint of amusement. Well, there's a first time for everything. Here, he handed her a pitchfork. Just copy what I do. The work was harder than it looked. Within minutes, Elizabeth's arms ached, and she could feel sweat dampening her borrowed shirt. But there was something satisfying about the simple physical labor. No emails to answer, no shareholders to please, just the straightforward task of making a space clean. You're a quick learner, Jake commented, showing her how to spread fresh straw. Their hands brushed as he adjusted her grip on the pitchfork, and Elizabeth felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach. When was the last time someone had touched her without an agenda? The morning progressed with Jake teaching her basic farm tasks. He showed her how to check the chicken coop for eggs, each warm oval, a small miracle in her inexperienced hands. They fed the few remaining cattle, and Elizabeth found herself charmed by their gentle eyes and demanding moos. "Why do you do it?" she asked as they carried water buckets to the troughs. "When it's this hard to keep going." Jake was quiet for a moment, his pace steady despite the heavy load. "Some things are worth fighting for," he finally said. "This land, it's more than dirt and grass. It's generations of stories, of lives lived and dreams built. Can't put a price on that." His words hit Elizabeth harder than she expected. In her world, everything had a price tag. Every decision was measured against quarterly profits and market projections. But here was something different, something that spreadsheets and algorithms couldn't quantify. As the morning wore on, Elizabeth noticed small details about Jake that fascinated her. The way his hands, rough from work, could be so gentle with the animals. How his smile, when genuine, created small creases around his eyes. The quiet confidence in his movements, so different from the manufactured self-assurance she was used to in Silicon Valley. "You're doing better than most city folks," he said, as they finished the morning chores. Most would have quit after the first wheelbarrow of manure. Elizabeth laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its freedom. Maybe I was ready for a change. She looked down at her mud-streaked clothes and dirty hands. "Though I admit this is quite a change. Sometimes those are the best kind," Jake replied, their eyes meeting for a moment that stretched just a bit longer than necessary. In that brief connection, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The simple joy of being seen for who she was, not what she was worth. The breakfast bell rang from the farmhouse, breaking the moment. As they walked toward the house, Elizabeth realized her muscles ached, her hair was a mess, and her manicure was probably ruined. And for the first time in her adult life, she didn't care at all. The next few days fell into a rhythm that surprised Elizabeth with its comfort. Each morning brought new tasks, new lessons, and a growing sense of capability she hadn't expected to find in herself. Jake proved to be a patient teacher, his quiet instructions helping her navigate this unfamiliar world with increasing confidence. "You've got a natural way with Thunder," he commented one afternoon, watching as Elizabeth brushed the mare's coat. The horse had indeed taken to her, nickering softly whenever she approached. What Jake didn't know was that Elizabeth had spent her lunch breaks watching YouTube videos about horse care on her backup phone, determined to do right by the animal who'd become her first real friend here. But while Elizabeth was finding her footing, she couldn't help noticing the strain in Jake's shoulders, growing heavier each day. The mail brought more letters with bank logos, each one making his jaw tighten. She watched him skip lunch to repair ancient equipment, his hands steady, but his eyes worried. News traveled fast in small towns. Elizabeth overheard whispers at the general store when she went to pick up supplies. "Poor Jake Morgan." The checkout lady said to another customer, "Bank's not giving him much time. Shame about the Morgan place, been here longer than most of us." The local farmers who passed by seemed to look at the property with a mix of sympathy and speculation. Some, like Old Tom Peterson brought casseroles and offered help with repairs. Others drove by slowly, clearly wondering how long it would be before the land went up for sale. Elizabeth found herself lying awake at night, her tech-savvy mind spinning with potential solutions. She could see the farm's untapped potential, the fertile soil that could support specialized crops, the beautiful landscape that could attract agricultural tourism, the potential for sustainable farming practices that could qualify for government grants. The businesswoman in her itched to help, but the friend she was becoming knew that offering financial assistance would wound Jake's pride. One morning, while helping Jake fix a fence, Elizabeth spotted a sleek car pulling up to the farmhouse. Through the dust, she recognized the type of vehicle favored by banking executives. Jake's face darkened as he walked toward the house, his shoulders set in a way that spoke of too many similar meetings. "Miss Chen?" a small voice interrupted. Her worried watching, she turned to find Amy Peterson, old Tom's granddaughter, holding up a basket of fresh eggs. "Dad said to bring these over and, are you staying? Because the whole town's wondering. Nobody new ever stays." The question caught Elizabeth off guard. Was she staying? The 2 weeks she'd allotted herself were half gone. Her company's board would be in chaos, the merger hanging by a thread. Yet the thought of returning to her old life felt increasingly hollow. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly, watching Jake disappear into the house with the banker. "But I'd like to." That evening, she found Jake sitting on the porch steps, staring out at his land as the sun set. Without a word, she sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. The silence between them felt comfortable, understanding. "Bank's given me 30 days, he finally said, his voice rough. "After that, they'll foreclose." Elizabeth's heart clenched. She had the power to solve this problem with a single phone call, but doing so would shatter the genuine connection they'd built. For the first time in her life, her wealth felt like a burden rather than an asset. "We'll figure something out," she said softly, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Jake turned to look at her, and in the fading light, she saw something shift in his expression. A spark of hope, perhaps, or a recognition of something deeper growing between them. The local farmers' market buzzed with weekend activity as Elizabeth helped Jake set up their modest stand. They'd brought the last of his stored winter vegetables and some fresh eggs, though Elizabeth knew the meager profits wouldn't make a dent. In the farm's troubles, her fingers itched to reach for her phone, to make the calls that could solve everything. Instead, she arranged carrots in neat rows, watching Jake interact with his neighbors. "Morgan Farms always had the best produce," an elderly woman said, examining their offerings. "My Henry, God rest his soul, swore by your father's tomatoes, Jake." She selected a few vegetables, insisting on paying full price when Jake tried to offer a discount. Elizabeth noticed how many others did the same, small gestures of support from a community trying to help one of their own. As the morning progressed, Elizabeth found herself drawn into conversations with locals, learning the intricate web of relationships that made up small-town life. Here, business wasn't conducted through emails and virtual meetings, but through handshakes and shared stories. Each transaction came with a snippet of history, a personal connection that made her own world of digital interactions feel sterile in comparison. "You've got a good eye for business," Jake commented during a quiet moment, watching her successfully negotiate with a restaurant owner interested in regular egg deliveries. "Where'd you learn that?" The question sent a jolt of anxiety through her. "Oh, just previous work experience," she managed, the half-truth bitter on her tongue. Every day, the weight of her secret grew heavier. She'd caught glimpses of herself. In the local paper's business section, speculation about her disappearance growing more elaborate with each passing day. After the market, they drove back to the farm in comfortable silence. Thunder greeted them with enthusiastic whinnies, and Elizabeth felt the now familiar warmth of being recognized, being wanted for herself, rather than her wealth or influence. She followed Jake to the barn, where they began unloading the truck. "Tell me about your father," Elizabeth said softly, remembering the way the market vendors had spoken of him. What kind of man was he? Jake paused, leaning against a wooden post. The late afternoon light filtered through the barn windows, casting long shadows across his face. He was authentic. Never tried to be anything he wasn't. Taught me that. The land doesn't care about pretenses. It responds to honest work and genuine care. The words hit too close to home, making Elizabeth's chest tight. And he loved farming, even with all its challenges? He used to say that farming isn't just a job, it's a conversation with the earth. Jake's voice held a mixture of pride and melancholy. Each season tells you something, if you're willing to listen. He listened better than anyone I knew. Elizabeth thought about her own father, his dreams of creating technology that would bring people together. How had that vision transformed into the corporate machine she now ran? "My father," she started, then caught herself. I imagine fathers like that leave big shoes to fill." Jake gave her a curious look, but didn't press. Instead, he led her to Thunder's stall, where the mare was enjoying her evening hay. "Want to learn something new? Time you learned how to ride properly, since you borrowed her." The next hour passed in a blur of instruction and laughter as Jake taught her the basics of horsemanship. Elizabeth, used to mastering complex technological systems, found herself humbled by the challenge of communicating with a 1,000-pound animal. Yet there was joy in the struggle, in learning something that couldn't be rushed or bought. "You're thinking too much," Jake called from the center of the paddock. "Feel the rhythm. Trust her. Trust." The word echoed in Elizabeth's mind as thunder, responded to her tentative commands. Trust was what she'd been missing in her old life, where every interaction was calculated, every relationship evaluated for strategic value. Here, trust was as essential as breathing. Trust in the horse beneath you, in the weather forecast, in the seeds planted in spring. As the sun began to set, they sat on the paddock fence, sharing a thermos of coffee. Elizabeth's muscles ached pleasantly from the day's activities, and she found herself studying Jake's profile against the darkening sky. "Why do you trust me?" she asked suddenly. "You barely know me, but you've let me into your life, taught me everything, even lent me your horse." Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering. Sometimes you meet someone and just know they're genuine, maybe not telling their whole story, but genuine in what matters. He turned to look at her directly. "Are you running from something, Elizabeth?" The question hung in the air between them. She could feel the weight of her secret pressing down, threatening to shatter this precious connection they'd built. "Not running from," she finally said, "more like searching for something real." He nodded, accepting her partial truth without demanding more. "Real is all we've got here. Sometimes too real when the bills come in." His attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the worry in his voice. Elizabeth looked out over the farm, her tech-trained mind seeing possibilities everywhere: sustainable farming initiatives, artisanal produce lines, farm-to-table partnerships. She could transform this place without losing its soul, if only she could find a way to help without revealing her identity. "Jake," she started, her heart racing. "What if—" But before she could continue, a truck's headlights swept across the paddock. Sarah's vehicle came to a stop nearby, and Jake's sister emerged with a worried expression. "Jake," the bank called. "They're moving up the deadline. They want a full payment plan by the end of next week." Sarah's voice carried clearly in the evening. Her eyes flickered to Elizabeth, measuring before returning to her brother. "We need to talk about options." Elizabeth watched the hope drain from Jake's face, replaced by the weight of responsibility and worry. In that moment, she made a decision. She couldn't reveal her identity yet. The trust they'd built was too precious to risk, but she could start putting plans in motion. Tomorrow, she would make a single call, set things in motion through intermediaries. The Morgan farm wouldn't be saved by Elizabeth Chen, tech billionaire, but perhaps it could be saved by Elizabeth, the woman who was learning to trust in something bigger than profit margins and market shares. Elizabeth waited until Jake was occupied with the morning cattle feed before making her call. Using her backup phone, she contacted her most trusted financial advisor, speaking in careful code they'd established years ago for sensitive acquisitions. "Martin, I need a quiet investment through our Shell Corporation, Rural Development Initiative, Montana, everything through local channels, completely anonymous." She rattled off the details, her eyes fixed on Jake's distant figure. "And Martin, if anyone connects this to me, you're fired." With that piece in motion, Elizabeth turned her attention to the farm itself. She began suggesting small changes, drawing on the business acumen she couldn't quite hide. "Have you considered selling at the organic market in Bozeman?" she asked Jake over lunch. "Their prices are triple what you're getting locally." Jake pushed his peas around his plate. "Transportation costs would eat any profit. Besides, I don't have the right certifications." "I could help with the paperwork," she offered, careful to keep her tone casual. "I used to work in administration." Another half-truth that tasted like sand in her mouth, but Jake was already nodding slowly, something shifting in his expression. "You know, that's not a bad idea. Sarah's been saying we need to think bigger." He looked at her with growing curiosity. "You see things differently than most people who pass through here." Elizabeth felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Here, her business insights weren't met with immediate implementation or sycophantic praise, but with thoughtful consideration and genuine appreciation. It felt more valuable than any boardroom victory. The afternoon found them in the North Field, where Elizabeth had convinced Jake to try a new irrigation technique she'd read about online. Actually, a cutting-edge system her company had funded. Last year, as they worked together under the Montana sun, she found herself studying his hands, strong and sure, as they connected pipes and checked soil quality. "City girl knows her way around farm equipment now," he teased, catching her watching. "Him? You're full of surprises." "You have no idea," she murmured, then quickly added, "I'm a fast learner. They worked until sunset, painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks." Elizabeth's muscles ached, but it was a satisfying pain, earned through meaningful work, rather than her usual soulless gym sessions. When Jake offered her a hand up from where she'd been kneeling in the dirt, she took it without thinking. He pulled her up with perhaps a bit more force than necessary, and suddenly, she was standing very close to him, their hands still joined. The dying sunlight caught in his eyes, and Elizabeth felt her breath catch. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake's free hand came up slowly, brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Elizabeth," he said softly, and she could hear everything. Unsaid in those 4 syllables, she swayed slightly closer, drawn by the gravity between them. Thunder chose that moment to whinny loudly from her paddock, startling them both. They jumped apart, the spell broken, but the electricity still crackling in the air between them. Later that evening, Elizabeth sat on the porch of her cabin, listening to the nighttime sounds of the farm. Her other phone, the one connected to her real life, lay hidden in her suitcase, probably filled with hundreds of frantic messages. The merger deadline was approaching, her board was likely in chaos, and the business world was buzzing with theories about her disappearance. She pulled out her laptop, using her hotspot to check the news. Sure enough, her face was still making. Headlines: Chen's disappearance threatens billion-dollar deal. Search continues for missing tech CEO. Chen Industries stock fluctuates as heiress remains missing. One headline made her pause. Sources suggest Chen Industries exploring agricultural technology investments. Her anonymous directive was already making waves, though not in the way most would suspect. She quickly closed the browser, afraid Jake might walk by and glimpse the screen. The sound of boots on gravel made her shut the laptop completely. Jake appeared around the corner, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might like some tea," he said, settling beside her on the porch steps. "Sarah says I'm working you too hard." Elizabeth accepted the mug gratefully, inhaling the familiar scent of chamomile. "I like the work. It feels real." "You keep using that word. Real." Jake's voice was thoughtful. "What exactly were you doing before you came here?" Elizabeth stared into her tea, choosing her words carefully. I worked in technology. Everything was digital, virtual. Connections were made through screens instead of... She gestured between them, then at the farm around them. Instead of this. And now, when your 2 weeks are up. The question she'd been dreading. Elizabeth felt her heart constrict. I don't know, she answered honestly. Everything's different now. Jake was quiet for a long moment. You could stay, he finally said, his voice low. Help me build something. Here. If we manage to save it. Elizabeth turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her. The moonlight softened his features, but she could see the vulnerability in his expression. Here was a man offering her a future based on who she was, not what she owned. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Jake leaned closer, and this time there was no horse to interrupt them. Elizabeth felt herself drawing nearer, her heart pounding. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she could feel the roughness of his palm against her skin. Just before their lips met, her phone buzzed in her pocket, her backup phone, but the sound was enough to break the moment. Jake drew back slightly, and Elizabeth felt the loss like a physical ache. I should check on Thunder, he said softly, standing. Early start tomorrow. Elizabeth watched him walk away, her heart torn between soaring and sinking. She was falling for him, hard and fast, but every step closer to Jake was another step deeper into her deception. As she touched her cheek where his hand had been, she wondered how much longer she could maintain this double life before everything came crashing down. The annual Harvest Festival transformed the town square into a tapestry of twinkling lights and autumn decorations. Elizabeth stood at the entrance, taking in the scene with wonder. Growing up, her social events had been charity galas and tech conferences, all sharp edges and strategic networking. This was different, warm, genuine, alive with laughter and music. Welcome to small-town entertainment, Jake said beside her, looking handsome in a clean flannel shirt and his best jeans. Not quite Silicon Valley, but we managed to have fun. The casual reference to her former world made Elizabeth's heart skip, but Jake was already leading her into the crowd. Everywhere she looked, she saw familiar faces from the farmers' market, each one greeting them with genuine warmth. Old Tom Peterson was calling square dances, his voice carrying over the local band's cheerful fiddle music. Jake Morgan, a plump woman in an apron, waved them over to a booth filled with pies. You brought your friend. We've all been dying to meet her properly. She turned to Elizabeth with a knowing smile. I'm Martha, dear. My diner's coffee has been keeping this boy alive since he was old enough to drink it. Elizabeth found herself drawn into conversation after conversation, each townsperson sharing a different piece of Jake's history. She learned about his high school football victories, his father's legendary crop yields, the time he rescued the Peterson twins from a creek during a flood. With each story, she felt herself falling deeper for the man beside her, even as guilt gnawed at her conscience. Time for the harvest dance, Old Tom announced, and couples began forming circles in the town square. Jake turned to Elizabeth with a shy smile. Care to dance? I promise not to step on your toes too much. Elizabeth took his offered hand, letting him guide her into position. I should warn you, my dancing experience is limited to corporate formal events. Just follow my lead, he said softly, pulling her closer as the music began. It's not so different from working with Thunder. You have to feel the rhythm, trust your partner. The dance was unlike anything Elizabeth had experienced. There was no careful choreography, no political maneuvering across the floor. Instead, she found herself caught up in the joy of movement, laughing as Jake twirled her through the simple steps. His hands were warm and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. During a slower song, Jake drew her closer. You know, he said thoughtfully, the farm's been showing some strange signs of luck lately. That grant application you helped me with got approved. The organic certification came through in record time. Even the bank's been more flexible about terms. Elizabeth forced her expression to remain neutral, though her heart raced. Sometimes things just work out. Maybe, His voice was careful. Or maybe I've got a guardian angel who knows more about business than she lets on. Before Elizabeth could respond, Sarah appeared at their side. Jake, Mr. Chen's representative is here. He wants to discuss the development proposal. Elizabeth froze. Chen Industries, her company, had been making moves through various subsidiaries trying to save the farm without revealing her involvement. But she hadn't expected them to show up at the festival. Jake's arm tightened around her waist. Not tonight, Sarah. Tonight's about celebrating what we have, not worrying about what we might lose. But Jake, I said no. His tone was firm but gentle. Besides, I've been thinking about something. He looked down at Elizabeth, his expression soft. Maybe we don't need some big corporation to save us. Maybe everything we need is already here. The music swelled around them, and Elizabeth felt tears threatening. Everything they needed was here: trust, community, real connection. But she was tainting it with every well-intentioned lie. The night air grew cooler, and Jake draped his jacket over her shoulders as they walked to a quiet corner of the festival. String lights twinkled overhead as they found a bench near the old courthouse. "I want to show you something," Jake said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Been working on plans for the farm. If we can hold on to it, I've got ideas for making it sustainable. Organic crops, educational programs for local schools, maybe even those farm-to-table events you mentioned." Elizabeth leaned closer, looking at his careful drawings and notes. She recognized some of the concepts. They were similar to proposals her company had implemented in other rural communities, but Jake had adapted them, made them personal to his land and community. "This is amazing," she said honestly. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything." Jake's voice was quiet. "Haven't figured out how to tell you that I'm falling in love with you." Elizabeth's heart stopped. She looked up to find him watching her, his expression vulnerable and hopeful. In that moment, she wanted nothing more than to tell him everything. About her company, her wealth, her power to make all his plans reality. But she also knew that doing so might destroy the very thing that made their connection so precious. "Jake," she whispered, A commotion from the festival interrupted them. Through the crowd, Elizabeth caught sight of a familiar face, her company's head of PR, scanning the crowd with purpose. They were looking for her. "I need some air," she said quickly, standing. "Just give me a minute." Jake nodded, concern crossing his features. "Want me to come with you?" "No, please, stay. I'll be right back." The lie felt like acid on her tongue. Elizabeth hurried away from the festival lights, her heart pounding. She couldn't let her two worlds collide, not here, not like this. But as she glanced back at Jake's silhouette, still waiting patiently on the bench, she realized she was running out of time. Soon she would have to choose: the empire she'd inherited or the real life she'd discovered here. The harvest moon hung low and full over the town square, casting long shadows across the festive scene. Somewhere in the distance, the band started, playing another slow song, and Elizabeth could hear old Tom calling out dance steps. She pressed her hand against Jake's jacket pocket, feeling the folded paper with his dreams sketched out in careful detail. In all her years of success and wealth, she'd never felt richer than she did tonight, wrapped in a borrowed jacket, dancing with a man who loved her for herself. And she'd never felt poorer, knowing that every moment of joy was built on a foundation of lies. The morning after the festival dawned clear and crisp, with frost sparkling on the fence posts. Elizabeth had spent a sleepless night in her cabin, alternating between reliving Jake's confession and frantically checking her emails. Her company's board was pushing forward with the merger, citing her absence as proof of instability. The financial press was having a field day with speculation about her whereabouts. But none of that seemed to matter when she stepped outside and saw Jake waiting. By Thunder's paddock, 2 steaming mugs in hand. He'd said he was falling in love with her. The thought made her chest tight with equal parts joy and fear. "Thought we could ride out to the North Ridge," he said, handing her a mug. "There's something I want to show you." The coffee warmed her. hands as they prepared the horses. Jake had been teaching her to saddle Thunder properly, and she felt a small surge of pride when he nodded approvingly at her work. They rode in comfortable silence, the morning mist parting before them. As they climbed higher, Elizabeth noticed subtle changes in the landscape. Small flags marked sections of the field, and new irrigation pipes gleamed in the early light. Her anonymous investments were already being put to use, though Jake didn't know their true source. "The grant monies helped more than I expected," Jake said, as if reading her thoughts. "But it's not just that. The organic certification, the new market contracts, it's like everything started turning around when you arrived." Elizabeth focused on guiding Thunder around a rocky patch. "Maybe the universe is finally on your side. Maybe." His voice was thoughtful. "Or maybe someone else's." They reached the ridge just as the sun broke fully through the morning haze. The view took Elizabeth's breath away, rolling hills stretching to distant mountains, the farm buildings tiny below them, everything touched with golden light. "This is where my father used to bring me when I needed perspective," Jake said, dismounting. He helped Elizabeth down, his hands lingering at her waist. "He said you can't understand what you're fighting for until you see it from above." Elizabeth surveyed the land, seeing it through new eyes. In her old life, she would have assessed it for development potential or investment return. Now she saw the generations of stories written in every field, every fence line, every weathered building. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's more than that." Jake turned to face her, his expression intense. "It's home, and lately I've been thinking it could be your home too." Elizabeth's heart stuttered. "Jake, I know you have secrets," he continued, taking her hands in his. "I know there's something you're not telling me. But I also know that when you're here, working beside me, laughing with the townspeople, caring for Thunder, that's the real you. I see it in your eyes." Tears threatened to spill down Elizabeth's cheeks. He was right. She'd never felt more genuine than she did here, covered in dirt. An honest sweat. The woman who strode through corporate boardrooms in designer suits seemed like a character she'd played in another life. "The farm's starting to turn around," Jake said softly. "Whatever happens with the bank, whatever your past is, we could build something real here. Together." He reached up to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so genuine, that Elizabeth felt something inside her break open. When Jake leaned in, she met him halfway. Their first real kiss tasted of coffee and morning air and possibility. His hands were gentle in her hair, and she could feel his heart racing where her palm rested against his chest. For a moment, everything else fell away, her wealth, her lies, the weight of expectations. There was only this, the warmth of his lips, the solid strength of his arms around her, the profound rightness of being here. When they finally parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you're afraid to tell me, we'll figure it out." Elizabeth closed her eyes, savoring the moment even as her mind raced. She had set things in motion that couldn't be stopped. Her financial advisor had created a complex web of local investments and grants, all designed to save the farm without revealing her identity. The organic certification had been expedited through carefully placed calls. Even the bank's sudden flexibility had come from subtle pressure applied through her corporate connections. "Jake," she began, not sure what she was going to say. The sound of an approaching vehicle made them both turn. Sarah's truck was winding up the access road, dust billowing behind it. Even at this distance, Elizabeth could see the urgency in the way she was driving. Jake's sister barely waited for the truck to stop before jumping out. "Jake, the most incredible thing." She paused, taking in their close proximity, the lingering intimacy of the moment. "Sorry, but this can't wait. The Agricultural Board just approved our proposal for the Sustainable Farming Initiative. Full funding, fast-tracked approval. They're calling it a pilot program for rural development." Elizabeth's stomach clenched. This was her doing, a program she'd had her company develop months ago, now being implemented here through a maze of subsidiaries and shell corporations. Jake stared at his sister in disbelief. That's impossible. Those applications take months to process. Not only that, Sarah continued, waving a folder, but some anonymous investor is offering to match the funding. Jake, this could save the farm. Elizabeth watched the hope bloom across Jake's face, feeling simultaneously elated and sick. Everything she'd done had been to help him, to save this place he loved so much. But each success only dug her deeper into her web of deception. "It's really happening," Jake said softly, turning to Elizabeth with shining eyes. "Everything we talked about, the sustainable farming, the educational programs, it's all possible now." He pulled her into a tight embrace, and Elizabeth hugged him back fiercely, hiding her face against his chest. Over his shoulder, she caught Sarah watching them with a calculating expression. His sister had always been the shrewd one, and Elizabeth could almost see the pieces coming together in her mind. "By the way," Sarah said carefully, "the investor's representative mentioned something interesting. Apparently, they have connections to Chen Industries." Elizabeth felt Jake stiffen slightly, but he didn't let her go. "Chen Industries? The tech company? The same one that's been in the news lately," Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on Elizabeth. "Their CEO's disappeared. Elizabeth Chen. Quite a coincidence, really." Elizabeth pulled back from Jake's embrace, her heart pounding. The moment she'd been dreading was rushing toward her like an oncoming train. But before she could speak, Jake took her hand. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "whatever you're about to say, remember what I told you. We'll figure it out." The trust in his voice made her want to cry. Here, on this ridge overlooking the land he loved, with the morning sun warming their shoulders and the taste of their first kiss still on her lips, Elizabeth made her decision. She would tell him everything, not because she had to, but because he deserved to know the woman he was falling in love with, all of her, even the parts she'd been hiding. Before Elizabeth could begin her confession, a distant rumble of thunder made them all turn westward. A wall of dark clouds was rolling in over the mountains, far too fast and too dark for a normal storm. Jake's expression shifted instantly from tender to alarmed. "That's not right," he muttered, already moving toward the horses. "Those clouds shouldn't be here. Forecast was clear all week." He grabbed his phone, quickly scanning the weather alerts. "Flash flood warning just posted. Sarah, get back to town. Warn everyone in the valley." Sarah was already running to her truck. "What about you?" "We need to move the cattle to higher ground and secure the equipment." Jake was in motion, his movements precise and practiced. "Elizabeth, ride back to the farm. Get inside. I'm helping," she cut him off, already mounting thunder. The skills he'd taught her over the past weeks kicked in automatically. "Tell me what to do." A flash of surprise and pride crossed his face before he nodded. "Stay close. This is going to get rough." They rode hard down the ridge as the storm charged in behind them. Elizabeth could feel the pressure dropping, the wind picking up with unnatural speed. Her tech-trained mind calculated angles and velocities. The storm would hit the farm in less than 20 minutes. Jake shouted instructions over the rising wind, and Elizabeth found herself moving with intuitive understanding of the farm's needs. They worked in seamless coordination, herding confused cattle toward the upper pastures, Thunder responding to Elizabeth's commands as if they'd been partners for years. The first massive drops hit as they secured the barn doors. Wind-driven rain stung Elizabeth's face as she helped Jake tie down crucial equipment. Through the sheets of water, she could see the creek that bordered the farm's eastern edge, already rising, angry and brown with floodwater. The irrigation. "Pipes!" Jake yelled over a thunderclap. "If they break loose, they'll take out the lower fence line," Elizabeth finished. Without discussion, they ran toward the threatened area. The expensive new pipes she'd helped acquire were at risk of becoming projectiles in the flood. They reached the irrigation system just as the creek burst its banks. Jake's flashlight beam caught the first pipe starting to tear free. Elizabeth's mind raced through physics calculations, water pressure, metal stress points, leverage needed. There, she pointed to a tractor they'd moved to higher ground. The chain in the cab. We can anchor the main line. Jake's eyes met hers through the rain, a flash of recognition passing between them. This wasn't the knowledge of a casual farmhand. But there was no time to dwell on it. The storm was unleashing its full fury. Working together, they secured the crucial components. Elizabeth's designer watch, the one piece of her old life she hadn't been able to leave behind, was smashed against a metal post as she helped Jake wrestle the last pipe into place. She barely noticed. A particularly violent gust of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Jake caught her, pulling her close against the storm. They stood braced together, watching their handiwork hold against nature's onslaught. That was either really brave or really stupid, Jake shouted over the thunder. Probably both. Elizabeth laughed despite everything, rain streaming down her face. Sounds like most of your plans. His answering smile was illuminated by a flash of lightning. In that frozen moment, Elizabeth saw him looking at her with something deeper than love. Recognition, understanding, respect. She wasn't just the mysterious stranger anymore. Through crisis and teamwork, he'd seen glimpses of who she really was. Her quick mind, her ability to lead, her instinct for solving problems. The truth was right there, ready to spill out. But before she could speak, a massive cracking sound split the air. They turned to see one of the ancient oak trees near the house starting to lean dangerously in the wind. The renovated barn. Jake's voice was desperate. If that tree falls, they were already running. The storm's fury driving them forward, the moment of revelation lost in the chaos of nature's challenge to everything they were fighting to save. The morning after the storm, Elizabeth stood in the farmhouse kitchen, helping Jake sort through water-damaged papers. The crisis had brought the community together. Neighbors were outside helping with repairs, their trucks dotting the muddy driveway. Through the window she could see old Tom Peterson using his tractor to help clear fallen branches. The TV droned quietly in the background, local news covering the storm damage. Elizabeth was only half listening until she heard a familiar name that made her blood run cold. Breaking news in the Elizabeth Chen disappearance. She turned slowly, horror mounting as she saw her own corporate headshot filling the screen. The reporter's voice continued, crisp and professional. Sources confirm the missing tech billionaire has been located in rural Montana. Chen Industries' CEO was reportedly seen helping local farmers during yesterday's severe storm. The sound of shattering ceramic made Elizabeth jump. Jake had dropped his coffee mug, his eyes fixed on the TV screen, then moving to her face, recognition dawning in his expression. That's why everything seemed familiar, he said quietly. The business insights, the quick thinking with the irrigation system, the mysterious grants. His voice hardened. It was all you. Jake, please let me explain. Explain what? His voice was controlled, but she could hear the hurt beneath it. That you're not just some random traveler, but the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. That all this time you could have bought this farm 10 times over without blinking. That's not why Did you have fun playing farmer? The bitterness in his voice cut deep. Was this some kind of corporate retreat? Seeing how the simple folk live? No! Elizabeth stepped toward him, but he backed away. Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real. Real? Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. You lied about who you are. Set up some complicated scheme to save the farm without telling me. How is any of that real? Before Elizabeth could respond, the farmhouse door burst open. Sarah rushed in, her face flushed. Jake, there are reporters. At the end of the driveway, lots of them. As if on cue, phones started ringing, both Elizabeth's backup phone and the landline. Through the window she could see vehicles with satellite dishes approaching on the main road. I never meant for this to happen, Elizabeth said desperately. I came here trying to escape all that, to find something genuine. And did you? Jake's voice was quiet now, almost defeated. Did you find what you were looking for while lying? To everyone around you? The truth hit her like a physical blow. In trying to protect their connection, she'd poisoned it. Every real moment they'd shared was now tainted by her deception. Sarah was looking between them, her expression complicated. The grants, the organic certification, the bank backing off. It was all you. Elizabeth nodded miserably. I wanted to help, but I was afraid if you knew who I was, we'd treat you differently, Jake finished, like you're treating us differently right now. Playing puppet master with our lives because you have the money to do it. Outside, cameras were starting to appear at the edge of the property. The simple, authentic world Elizabeth had found here was crumbling under the weight of her real identity. I love you, she whispered, the words falling into the space between them. That wasn't a lie. Jake's face softened for just a moment before hardening. Again, maybe not, but everything around it was. He turned away, shoulders rigid. You should go, your world is calling. Elizabeth stood frozen, watching as Jake walked out of the kitchen, out of the life they might have had. Through the window, she could see the media circus growing, her carefully constructed escape dissolving in the harsh light of truth. The simple, borrowed clothes she wore felt like a costume now, a physical reminder of the role she'd played. The woman who had come here, searching for something real, had found it, only to destroy it with the very lies she'd told to protect it. 3 days after the revelation, Elizabeth sat in a luxury suite at the nearest city's best hotel, surrounded by the trappings of her old life. Her corporate clothes felt stiff and foreign now, the high heels a far cry from borrowed work boots. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from the board, her PR team, and the endless media requests. The television silently played business news, her own face appearing regularly in the corner screen. The headlines cycled endlessly. Chen Industries CEO found, tech billionaire's rural adventure, Wall Street responds to Chen's return. But the one that hurt most was from the local paper, Morgan Farm, at center of corporate deception. The farm. Even from her sterile hotel room, she could picture it clearly. The morning mist rising over the fields, thunder nickering in her stall, Jake's quiet strength as he went about his daily work. The world she'd found there felt like a dream now, dissolving in the harsh light of reality. Marcus, her CFO, paced the suite's living room. The merger partners are demanding immediate action. Your little vacation has made them nervous. They're questioning the company's stability. Let them, Elizabeth said quietly, watching a flock of pigeons land on the windowsill. They reminded her of the chickens she used to feed each morning. Maybe it's time to question everything. Elizabeth, be reasonable. You've had your adventure. Now it's time to come back to the real world. The real world, she almost laughed. Nothing had felt more real than mucking out stalls with Jake, learning the rhythm of farm life, seeing the genuine connection between people in the small town. Her corporate world, with its artificial deadlines and political maneuvering, suddenly seemed like the false one. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah Morgan stood in the hallway, looking out of place in her practical clothes amid the hotel's luxury. Your security tried to stop me, she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. But I figured since you spent weeks pretending to be someone else on our property, I could spend 5 minutes being someone else in your hotel. Marcus stepped forward, but Elizabeth waved him off. Give us a minute. When they were alone, Sarah spoke first. You've made quite a mess. I know. Elizabeth stood by the window, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. How is he? Hurt, angry, proud. Sarah's voice softened slightly. Missing you, though he won't admit it. Elizabeth turned, hope fluttering in her chest. Don't, Sarah warned. It's not that simple. The whole town's in chaos. Reporters everywhere. People taking sides. Some think you were playing us for fools. Others think you're some kind of saving angel. Jake's stuck in the middle of it all. I never meant to fall in love, to help, to lie. Sarah's tone wasn't unkind, just direct. The problem is, you did all three. And now Jake's left, questioning every moment, every conversation, every feeling. Was it real, or was it just another tech billionaire's experiment in rural living? Elizabeth sank into a chair. It was real, all of it. I came here running from my life, but I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. And now? Now? Elizabeth gestured at the hotel room, the business clothes, the buzzing phone. Now I'm back in my cage, exactly where everyone expects me to be. Sarah studied her for a long moment. You know what your mistake was? Not the lying, though that was bad enough. It was thinking you had to choose between these worlds. The Elizabeth who mucked out stalls and helped during the storm? She's just as real as the one who runs a billion-dollar company. The question is, are you brave enough to be both? The words hit Elizabeth like a thunderbolt. She'd been so focused on escaping her old life, she hadn't considered integrating her two selves. The farm still needs saving, Sarah continued, moving toward the door. And Jake, he needs someone who's honest about who they are, all of who they are. Think about it. After Sarah left, Elizabeth stood at the window for a long time, watching the city lights replace the setting sun. In her mind, she could see Jake standing on the North Ridge, showing her the view of his land, believing in her when he didn't even know who she really was. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe it wasn't about choosing one life over the other, but about finding the courage to live both truthfully. The question was, would Jake give her the chance to try? Elizabeth stood before her board of directors, no longer in borrowed farm clothes, but in a tailored suit that felt like armor. The Manhattan skyline stretched behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows, a world away from Montana's rolling hills. The merger documents lay unopened on the polished conference table. Before we proceed, she said, her voice steady, I want to propose a new direction for Chen Industries. The board members shifted uneasily. These were people who'd known her for years, who'd watched her build the company alongside her father. Now they looked at her as if she were a stranger. Your absence has already delayed the merger significantly, Charles Wilson, the lead director, said carefully. The markets are getting nervous. Let them. Elizabeth pulled up a presentation. On the large screen, what if I told you I've found a way to revolutionize agricultural technology while maintaining our tech focus? A way to bridge the digital divide and create sustainable solutions for rural communities. She clicked through slides showing the Morgan farm, careful to keep Jake out of the photos. During my time away, I saw firsthand the challenges facing American farmers. But I also saw the potential. Imagine combining our AI capabilities with sustainable farming practices, smart irrigation systems, predictive crop management, direct farm-to-table platforms. The boardroom fell silent as she outlined her vision. It wasn't just about saving one farm anymore. It was about transforming rural America while preserving its soul. Everything she'd learned from Jake, everything she'd come to understand about the value of real connection and honest work poured into her presentation. The merger would give us short-term profits, she concluded. This could give us a legacy. Wilson leaned forward. And this sudden interest in agriculture wouldn't have anything to do with certain recent personal developments. Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. My time at the Morgan farm opened my eyes to possibilities we've been ignoring. Yes, it became personal. That's what makes it valuable. We've spent years creating technology to connect people, but we've lost touch with the real world ourselves. Her phone buzzed, a message from Sarah. The bank was moving up their deadline again. Jake had 24 hours to present a payment plan or lose everything. The timing wasn't coincidental. Word of Elizabeth's board meeting had leaked, and the bank was trying to force Jake's hand before any potential corporate intervention. They wanted to sell to developers who'd already carved up 3 other local farms. Elizabeth felt the weight of both worlds on her shoulders. In one, she had the power to save everything Jake loved with a single signature. In the other, she had his trust to rebuild, proving that her feelings and intentions were genuine. I'm calling a board vote, she announced. Not on the merger, but on my new rural technology initiative. If it fails, I'll sign the merger documents as planned. She paused, straightening to her full height. If it passes, I'm relocating our new agricultural division to Montana. Murmurs rippled through the room. Elizabeth continued, her voice firm. And to show our commitment to understanding the communities we aim to serve, I'll be running it from there personally. You can't be serious, Wilson sputtered. You want to move our CEO office to some backwater, to the heart of where our new technology will make a real difference, Elizabeth corrected. We've spent too long in our glass towers, Wilson. It's time to get our hands dirty, she thought. Of Jake, of the way he'd taught her to feel the soil's readiness for planting, to read weather in the wind, to understand that some things couldn't be rushed or automated. There was wisdom there that Silicon Valley desperately needed. The vote will be held in 1 hour, she announced. Just enough time for you all to consider whether you want to be part of something truly innovative or just another tech company looking for a quick profit. As the board members filed out for their deliberation, Elizabeth moved to the window. Somewhere in Montana, Jake was probably feeding the cattle, maybe pausing to watch the sunrise over his land. She'd lied to him about who she was, but she'd finally figured out who she wanted to be. Someone who could bridge both worlds, who could use her power to protect the things that truly mattered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. Chen Industries stock fluctuates as CEO proposes radical new direction. Elizabeth smiled slightly. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of the Morgan farm, but her own future as well. For the first time since leaving Montana, she felt truly, completely herself. The sun was setting over the Morgan farm when Elizabeth's car pulled up the familiar dirt road. The board's vote had taken less than an hour, her passion and vision winning over even the staunchest skeptics. Now she had the authority and resources to save the farm, but the harder challenge lay ahead, saving what she'd built with Jake. The media circus had mostly dispersed, leaving only a few persistent reporters at the property edge. Elizabeth ignored them as she parked, her eyes fixed on the farmhouse porch where Jake stood waiting. He'd known she was coming, Sarah had made sure of that, but his expression was unreadable in the fading light. "You're too late," he said as she approached. "I signed the papers this morning, sold to the developers." Elizabeth's heart stopped. "You didn't," almost did. A hint of his old humor flickered across his face. "But someone once told me some things are worth fighting for." She climbed the porch steps slowly, maintaining a careful distance. "The bank's deadline is in 2 hours." Jake's voice was steady. "I know you've got some grand corporate solution planned. Sarah told me about the board meeting, but before you say anything, I need you to listen." Elizabeth nodded, her heart pounding. "When you first arrived here, I thought I was helping some lost city girl find her way. Turns out you were the one helping me find mine." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd grown to love. "This farm was dying, Elizabeth. Not just financially, but in spirit. I was so focused on preserving what my father built, I couldn't see the future right in front of me. Jake, He held up a hand. "Let me finish. These past weeks, watching you learn to ride thunder, to work the land, to care about this place, it changed something in me. You saw possibilities I was too proud or scared to see. And yes, you lied about who you were, but maybe I needed to meet that version of you first, before I could understand this one." Elizabeth felt tears threatening. "I never meant to hurt you. No." He finally stepped closer. "Sarah showed me your proposal to the board. Moving your agricultural division here, developing sustainable farming technology, preserving family farms across the country." A small smile touched his lips. "Pretty impressive for someone who couldn't tell a chicken from a rooster 3 weeks ago. I had a good teacher. You had more than that. You had a vision of how to bridge 2 worlds that desperately need each other." He took another step forward. "The question is, where do I fit in that vision?" Elizabeth met his eyes. "Everywhere. As a partner, if you'll have me. Not just in business, but in life." She pulled a folder from her bag. "I'm not here to buy the farm or save it with corporate money. I'm here to propose a partnership. Equal stakes, equal say. Your knowledge and my resources. Your traditions and my innovations." She offered him the folder with slightly shaking hands. "Everything's in your name. I don't want to own your land, Jake. I want to help you make it thrive as equals. And maybe, if you can forgive me, as more than that." Jake took the folder but didn't open it. Instead, he stepped close enough that Elizabeth could see the gold. Flecks in his eyes, the ones she'd first noticed during their morning rides. "The woman I fell in love with," he said softly, "was brilliant and caring and saw the best in this place when I'd almost lost hope. She just happened to be hiding the fact that she was also one of the most powerful CEOs in the country." He smiled. "Turns out I'm in love with both versions. The real question is, are you ready to be both? Here, with me." Elizabeth felt something, tight in her chest, finally release. "I'm not just ready," she whispered. "I'm home." This time when they kissed, there were no secrets between them, no hidden identities or unspoken truths. Just as the last light faded from the sky, thunder whinnied from her paddock, as if giving her own approval to this new chapter in the farm's story. The bank's deadline came and went, rendered meaningless by the partnership agreement in Jake's folder. But more meaningful was the silent promise between two people who had found something real in a world of artificial connections, a love built on truth, grown in the rich soil of understanding and strong enough to bridge any divide. 2 months later, the Morgan farm buzzed with a different kind of energy. The old barn had been transformed into a state-of-the-art agricultural technology center, though Jake had insisted on keeping its weathered exterior intact. Inside, local farmers gathered around screens displaying weather patterns and soil analyses, while tech experts from Chen Industries learned about generations of farming wisdom. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, watching Jake demonstrate traditional crop rotation principles to a group of software developers. He'd taken to teaching with natural ease, helping bridge the gap between silicon and soil. She smiled, remembering his initial skepticism about having computer people on the farm. "You're not going to believe this," Sarah said, hurrying up with a tablet in hand. "The sustainable farming program has already gotten interest from 50 other family farms in the region. They want to be part of the pilot project." Elizabeth nodded, unsurprised. Word had spread quickly after the Morgan farm's transformation. The sight of a tech billionaire and a traditional farmer working side by side, combining the best of both worlds, had captured imaginations far beyond their small town. "Jake was right about the educational programs too," she replied, watching. A group of local school children arrive for their weekly farm technology lesson. The waiting list is 3 months long now. The farm had become exactly what they'd envisioned, a living laboratory where traditional farming methods met cutting-edge technology. The organic certification programs Jake had once struggled with were now streamlined through apps developed on site. Drone monitoring helped predict weather patterns, while AI systems optimized irrigation using generations of local farming knowledge. Thunder's paddock had expanded into a full riding program, where stressed-out tech executives learned the value of unplugging, while local kids discovered the excitement of coding. Elizabeth still rode every morning with Jake. Those quiet moments together remained sacred, untouched by the changes around them. The board's quarterly report came in, Elizabeth said as Jake joined her, wiping soil from his hands. "Our agricultural division is outperforming projections by 30%. Turns out there's a real hunger for technology that respects tradition instead of replacing it." Jake wrapped an arm around her waist, both of them watching the diverse groups of people working together across the farm. "And to think you almost merged with that tech conglomerate instead. Best decision I never made." She leaned into him. "Though I'm still not sure what convinced the board more, my presentation or your mother's apple pie at the first stakeholder meeting." "Definitely the pie," Jake chuckled. "Some things even Silicon Valley can't improve on." Old Tom Peterson's truck pulled up, loaded with produce for the farm's new digital marketplace platform. The online system connected local farmers directly with urban customers, cutting out middlemen and ensuring fair prices for both sides. It had been Jake's idea, born from years of watching small farmers struggle against big agricultural corporations. "Got those heirloom tomatoes your chef's been asking about?" Tom called out to Elizabeth. The farm's farm-to-table restaurant housed in a converted silo had become an unexpected success, drawing food critics from across the country. "Speaking of food," Jake said, checking his watch, "Martha's waiting for us at the diner. Says she's got wedding venue suggestions." Elizabeth smiled, touching the simple engagement ring on her finger. They'd agreed to hold the ceremony on the North Ridge, where they'd shared their first kiss. The guest list would be an unusual mix. Silicon Valley executives and local farmers, tech journalists and ranch hands, all brought together by a love story that bridged two worlds. "First, there's something I want to show you," she said, leading Jake to the old farmhouse kitchen. On the table lay architectural plans for a new building, a combination of modern glass and traditional barn wood. "The Children's Technology Center you talked about?" The board approved it unanimously. Jake studied the plans, his expression softening. "Dad would have loved this, you know. He always said farming was about growing more than just crops. It was about growing possibilities." He was right. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around him from behind. "And so were you. That day you took a chance on a rain-soaked stranger asking to borrow your horse." "Best risk I ever took," Jake said, turning to kiss her. "Though I'm still not sure who rescued who." Through the window, they could see Thunder in her paddock, now surrounded by a dozen other horses. The mare had adapted well to her new role as the farm's ambassador, greeting visitors with the same gentle curiosity she'd shown Elizabeth all those weeks ago. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in familiar golds and pinks. But now the view included solar panels alongside the old windmill, and satellite's dishes nestled among the silos. It wasn't just the Morgan farm anymore. It was a vision of the future, one that honored the past while embracing new possibilities. And at its heart stood two people who had found a way to be their truest selves together, proving that sometimes the greatest innovations come not from technology or tradition alone, but from the courage to bridge the space between them. Winter settled softly over the Morgan farm, snow dusting the solar panels and coating the ancient oak trees in crystalline white. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, now a curious blend of modern technology and rustic charm, Elizabeth added the finishing touches to their first holiday dinner as an engaged couple. The guest list had grown beyond their expectations. Silicon Valley executives mingled with local farmers, their children playing together in the new activity center. Sarah's young daughter was teaching a venture capitalist's son how to properly feed chickens, while Martha from the diner discussed digital payment systems with Elizabeth's former CFO. Jake stood in the doorway, watching the unlikely gathering with quiet satisfaction. The farm had become more than just a bridge between two worlds. It was creating a new one entirely. Young programmers were signing up for farming apprenticeships, while agricultural students eagerly learned coding. The Morgan farm had become a blueprint for rural innovation centers across the country. "Ready to make the announcement?" Elizabeth asked, joining him with 2 glasses of Martha's famous cider. Jake smiled, taking her hand. "Let's tell them about the expansion." The announcement caused a stir among their gathered guests. The Morgan-Chen Rural Innovation Network would establish 10 new centers across the country, each pairing struggling family farms with technology partners. The program would provide both funding and education, preserving traditional farming while embracing innovation. "It's what my father always dreamed of," Jake explained to the crowd. "Not just saving one farm, but creating a future for farming itself." Elizabeth squeezed his hand as she added, "And each center will be run by people who understand both worlds, farmers who want to innovate and tech experts willing to learn from tradition." Old Tom Peterson wiped away tears as he raised his glass. To think it all started with a borrowed horse and a rainstorm. Thunder, visible through the window with her new foal, seemed to nod in agreement. The little colt, born just last week, represented everything the farm had become, a perfect blend of heritage and hope. To new beginnings, Jake and Elizabeth set together, their voices carrying the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined alone. 1 year later, the North Ridge bloomed with wildflowers as Elizabeth and Jake exchanged vows beneath the old oak tree. Thunder, adorned with a garland of flowers, stood proudly beside them, her foal prancing in the spring breeze. The gathered crowd represented their unified world. Ranch hands in boots next to executives in suits, all witnesses to a love that had bridged seemingly impossible divides. Sarah, as maid of honor, held out the reins that would lead them on their first ride as husband and wife. The tradition dated back generations on the Morgan farm, but now the bride wore a designer dress with borrowed cowboy boots, and their rings had been carried by a drone decorated as a dove. "Ready, Mrs. Morgan Chen?" Jake whispered. Elizabeth smiled, remembering that rainy night when she'd first arrived, lost and searching. "I've been ready since the moment you opened your door to a stranger."